Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Intentional Man Podcast. I'm your host, Rick Luttrell. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Intentional Man Podcast. Rusty, today we're talking about purity. And with all of our podcasts, we're looking at different topics and how a man can be more intentional with life. And I believe that purity is probably one of the most difficult in some cases, and one of the most prevalent, I think, in a man's life where we need to be intentional with something. You know, it's being pure in all areas. We think about, a lot of times we go right to the sexual side of being pure. You know, don't have sex before marriage, be careful what you're thinking about or looking at, all those things. And we'll talk about some of that in the podcast. But being pure does go beyond that as well. It covers our life in general and our, the way we do business and all of the way we treat people, all those things. So I think this would be a good conversation.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's something that men, probably more so than women, probably struggle with this at times more in certain areas. And you're right. I think that's kind of our default, is that we naturally go to a sexual purity, but that's not all that this word encompasses, not all that we're going to talk about. Certainly that's part of it, but that's not all of it. And I think that's important to note as well, that it doesn't just refer to the sexual realm.
Yeah. Purity is a difficult thing to conquer, I would say. Obviously as Christian men, we know that we're called to be pure. And again, we'll look at some scriptures and things as we go through this. But just because we're called to be pure, and even that we have the Spirit of the Lord in us helping us to be pure, it doesn't turn off the natural desires of the flesh. It doesn't turn off the things that are available to a man in the world. Mother Teresa said, to be pure can only come at a price. The price of knowing God and loving Him enough to do His will. So for a man to be pure, a Christian man to remain pure, we have to be willing to pay that price. Do I love God, and do I value my relationship with Him more than I value this temporary pleasure, whatever type of pleasure it is for that guy? So again, it costs us something. So I think, again, today's discussion will be interesting because it applies to every single man who's ever lived, I would say. I don't think it's a far-fetched idea to think that every man who's lived has dealt with the struggle of remaining pure in some way or another in his life.
I think that's important to say, that we have to deal with it. We can't ignore it. We can't forget about it, think we're just going to put it in a box and not have to worry about it, that we have to deal with it. Like so many things that we have talked about, we have to make sure that we are intentional about it, that we don't just think we're going to overcome it with our sheer force of will, that we're going to just say, okay, well, I've thought about that once and that's it, that it is ongoing, it's constant, and we have to make sure that we do deal with it, that we don't ignore it, that we have a plan, that we have a way out in certain instances, I believe, as well.
Right. And that's biblical. Again, we'll probably cover that later on. With every temptation, the Lord makes a way out. Mm-hmm. It's not impossible. And that is something we need to keep in mind. While it's prevalent, the opportunities to be impure in different areas of our life are prevalent, very easy, and culture even okays them in many cases. It's not impossible for us to be pure. And not that we'll never make a mistake in some area, maybe, but it's not impossible to live that life. And kind of going along with this, we actually had a guy ask a question about being pure. He said, what is a way of controlling your lust? And I thought that was a great question. And you and I have talked about this a little bit before the podcast, talking about, okay, is it really about us controlling our lust? Is it something that we can wrangle just on our own will? And you even said it a few minutes ago. Is it something that we can wrestle with and really conquer ourselves? Or is there more to it? Do we need something more than just our will? And I believe the answer is yes. And we'll be talking about that. But what do you think?
I think it's difficult. I think it depends, of course, too, on your situation. If you're younger, older, if you're married, single, I don't think there's an easy, sure, follow these 3 easy steps and you too will be pure. I don't think it's that by any stretch. We find ourselves in different situations, and we have to know what stage we are in life and again, have a plan. for how to deal with it, or know what our certain triggers are to where we can maybe avoid those. If you find yourself in certain situations, like, with this individual saying, well, my lust, I can really feel it rising at this point. Okay, we'll make a plan for that point. So again, I don't think there's a really easy, straightforward answer that covers every single base.
Right. Yeah, you bring up a good point. With any addiction, it could be something to do with lust. It could be something to do with, even alcoholism or anything, eating, whatever the addiction is for that person. They typically do run in cycles. There'll be something that triggers it. And for some people, it could be when they're tired. It could be when they feel stressed or even hungry. But there are certain times of the day or certain periods in life that tends to trigger them to give in to whatever addiction they have. So yeah, recognizing that, when if I look back over my life and say, okay, when do I typically give into this? When is it the biggest problem for me? Then I can be prepared. I can say, okay, I need to make sure that during these times of my life, I am set up for success here, that I have things in place that help me, because while we do have the power of the Holy Spirit and the Lord is fighting alongside us, fighting for us, there's also the responsibility we bear to find that exit that He's provided for us. It's the Bible tells us to flee from temptation. We don't wait around and see if we can battle it ourselves. Get away from it. So if there are times in our life where we are tempted and we see, we kind of see it coming. It's like, okay, I feel it coming on. Get out of there. Remove yourself from the environment if possible. Pray. Lord, I need you right now. And the Lord isn't deaf to our prayers. Again, He makes that way of escape, and it may simply be through that lifeline that He's giving us right at that moment to overcome that temptation.
I think that's a good first step, is recognizing those maybe associations that we have. Like you mentioned, eating, that it might be someone was used to eating, I don't know, a pint of Haagen-Dazs or Ben & Jerry's every time they sat down to watch this particular show. Well, realize, is it you're eating because of the show or vice versa, or what is it about this particular moment in time that is giving you that association? Doing the same thing in terms of purity, that, okay, why is it that I am faltering at this particular time? Is there an association I need to stop? Is it a situation that I am putting myself in that I need to reverse or get out of? Is there something that maybe I can't avoid, but I need to have a plan going into it, changing my mindset, my mind frame of how I'm going to look at this situation? So I think there are a number of tools. We just have to make sure that we are aware of them, and we stop and kind of maybe take a pause and back up and go, okay, what is it? What is the link? Try to figure it out. Actually, to do a little bit of self-reflection and deep dive to where you can make an exit plan. You can get out of a situation, or you can reverse this association that you have with it.
Right. So to begin with, let's look at what the Bible has to say about purity. In today's culture, the idea of purity isn't necessarily popular, or it's skewed. It's not an absolute truth, as with so many things in culture today. It becomes very washed out. Your opinion versus mine versus theirs. It's not a concrete idea in culture, but the Bible is very concrete on it. The Bible talks about purity quite a bit. And as an example, Matthew 5:8 says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." In each of the scriptures I'm going to share right now, just 3 of them, but there's different ideas in each one talking about purity, because again, it's not just sexually. Purity is a lifestyle. That's one of the things that we've taught our kids, or we're teaching our kids as they grow, is when we talk about being pure, we're not just talking about not having sex before marriage. Of course, that's also very important. We believe that's biblical, and God created sex in a certain design and to be used in a certain relationship, husband and wife, and that's how it works. That's why God designed it. That's how He designed it. But it does go beyond that. We try to help them understand, and men need to understand, just to be pure, it's not just not sinning sexually. It goes beyond that. And even here, so it says in Matthew 5:8, "Blessed are the pure in heart." And we've also heard the saying, what's in your heart is what comes out of your mouth. It's going to come out. So when we're pure in our heart, our motives are pure towards other people, pure in our careers and in all areas of life, then that's what's going to be coming out. That purity is going to be just be who we are. It's not something we're trying to wrangle and keep under control or suppress while we're around others. It's who we are. So a man, number one, needs to be praying, Lord, help me to be pure in heart, not just in my mind, not just in my thoughts, but let my heart be pure.
Yeah, I actually wrote that one down first as well. And I like it because it's got nothing to do with sexuality or sex in this case. He is saying being pure in heart, meaning that spiritually we need to be pure. We need to remember to keep God first in everything that we do, to love him with all of our heart, mind, and soul. And so he is referring to that. He's not referring just to the sexual aspect of it or to lust that so often gets wrapped up in that word. And you're right, it's not that we can just be sexually pure and yet live however we want to in other areas of our life, in terms of if we are honest with people in business with our day-to-day life. I mean, we can't just say, oh, well, I am pure, and think that just because it's one area that encompasses everything, because that's obviously not the case either. That this is something that, again, this quote that we have and that is often repeated, that's not what it's talking about. It is talking about being spiritually pure. And, in your heart, as you said, what's in your heart's going to come out. It's how we treat each other, talk to people as well. So absolutely, it's a great first one to say, listen, again, this is not just this one aspect, that it is definitely more when we're talking about purity than just sexual purity.
Yeah, Psalms 119:9 says, how can a young man keep his way pure? By guarding it according to your word. This one, I believe, speaks directly to this gentleman's question. He says, what is a way of controlling your lust? Well, Psalms 119, how can a young man keep his way pure? Basically, how can a young man control that lust? By guarding it according to your word. So if we know God's word, and that's key, we have to get into it. We have to study his word. We have to read it. We have to memorize passages and just get it into our heart. Going back to the heart's pure. When we know God's word through our studying, through what we hear from pastors and devotions and other things, then it sets up those guardrails that we've talked about in other podcasts. Those parameters those self-imposed parameters. I want these in my life to help keep me pure. I want these things to be present. When we allow God's word to be those guards, then we're more likely to be pure, because it has so much to do with what we surround ourselves with as well. What are we watching on TV? What kind of movies? What kind of music are we listening to? What places are we going? Are they spiritually healthy for us? Are they putting the right stuff into us that's helping us to grow healthy and spiritually healthy? Or is it really just these things that are being pumped into us that then promote the lack of purity in our lives? It's say, well, I didn't do those things, but if you're watching those things and those thoughts are in your mind, it just increases the chances of us really struggling with that. It would be like an alcoholic. A lot of alcoholics would never go into, clean alcoholics, people who no longer are addicted to alcohol, would most likely not go back into a bar because they know the temptation's there and it could cause them to fail. For men, if we want to remain pure, then we shouldn't put ourselves in the circumstances that would intentionally try that purity. Yeah, we may find ourselves there. We're surrounded by it in culture, but we shouldn't intentionally put ourselves in circumstances that are really going to test us, and potentially make us fail because of what we're surrounded by.
Right. It's very similar to, as we've mentioned and talked about before, that you are more or less the average of the 5 people you hang around with the most. So if you take that, kind of extrapolate it then and go, okay, so if I'm going to be surrounded by certain types of music, TV, online, anything, social media, if that is what you are constantly surrounding yourself by, then of course it's just kind of almost ingrained in you. You're going to struggle with certain aspects. Like, this individual, if he's got that going around and then going, well, how am I going to control the lust? It's the same thing. Yeah, it's like, well, if you're an alcoholic who's constantly going in bars, maybe that's the first step is, stop hanging out in bars. Remove yourself from that situation. Be aware of it. And then also, too, I like it because this is something specifically, as you read in Psalms, that we can do and that need to be done beforehand. This is something to be able to say, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to fill your mind, your heart with the word, and not be something like, maybe our grandparents' advice, if we had gone to them and said kind of the same thing, I'm struggling. And they say, well, if you have those thoughts, just go read your Bible. That's a really nice idea. But that's one of those that's, a lot easier said than done. But if you've done the work beforehand and you can kind of go, okay, I know, or I can, I recognize I'm now in this situation, that you can call back on what you have already read, what you've already memorized, what you've already absorbed, and to say, to call on the Lord to protect my thoughts, protect what I am, going through, basically to call out and say, okay, Lord, you said if I called on you that you would deliver me, and that you have a way out, that you have already done the work up front, not that you're trying to do the work when you're in the midst of it. So I think it's two completely different things. Kind of, anything else that we've talked about, if you struggle with donuts and all of a sudden you got a box of Krispy Kreme in front of you, well, if now you're making the decision if you're going to eat those or not, might be kind of difficult. But if you've already decided beforehand, yeah, I know that there's going to be this, I'm not going to do it, I'm at peace with it, I've already, kind of gone through that struggle, it's obviously a lot easier. So same thing applies here. We have to make those decisions up front, do it beforehand, so that when we find ourselves in the midst of the situation, it's not nearly as challenging or as difficult as what it would be if we waited.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's being prepared up front. That's perfect advice. I was thinking, as you said, your grandparents tell you, well, go read the Bible if you think that. And you flip open to like Song of Solomon.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I know. This isn't helping at all.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah. I tried. But it's true though. It's not something that we need to figure out when we get there. It should be something we've already purposed in our heart, we've already planned for. And especially as men, we know that we know where we're tempted. We know that we will be tempted. So when we know, again, going back to what you said earlier, when we know what our temptation is, when we know kind of the cycle in which it hits, prepare yourself. Don't be like a dumb sheep, just wandering into trouble over and over. Recognize it and set up some defenses there. Ephesians 5:3 says, but sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not be named among you, as it is proper among saints. And I like this one because it actually has it's a clear delineation between both. It's not just, impurity is sexual immorality. It says sexual immorality, which is impure, and all impurity. So I just think it made very clear that we're not just talking about sexual purity when we talk about being pure as men. There's again a lot of ways. And think about Achan. No, not Achan. What I'm not going to be able to think of the guy's name now. The guy who was struck dead because he lied about what the money he made when he brought it before the disciples. What was that? And then his wife came in after, and she got struck down too. You remember that?
I don't remember the name. Yeah, I don't remember the names.
Yeah, I can't remember. I can't believe I forgot the name. But anyway, they had sold land, and because that's what was happening in the New Testament. And people were selling their land. They were bringing the money to the church to be used and dispersed among all the Christians. It was just kind of everybody's stuff was in common. So they sold some property, and nobody made them. Nobody made them sell the property. Nobody said, hey, you have to give it all, even if you sell it. They chose to sell the property. He brings the money in and he presents it, and he says, this is basically, we sold the property for this much, here's the money, all of it. And he lied, not just to the people, it was pointed out, he lied to the Holy Spirit, and he died right there. His wife comes in a little while later, does the same thing, she dies. And to me, that just points out the extent that purity goes to. He came with an impure heart. He came with a deceitful heart. before the Lord and before the church. And not that everybody, fortunately, not everybody struck dead as soon as that happens. We have the opportunity to be forgiven and restored. But it is a form of impurity. So we need, as men, we need to look at our lives. Okay, is there any impure thing in me? And if I'm not mistaken, David, King David, he prayed that.
Yep.
Search me, O Lord. Let me know if there's any impure thing in me and lead me in the way everlasting, something along those lines. That's an excellent prayer for us to pray every morning or every night or every day. Lord, show me. You know me better than I know myself. You know where the impurities lie. What do I need to work on? What needs to be clean? And just let the Lord reveal that to us. And once he does, deal with it and move forward, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a good point, that we have all had areas where we have been impure or where we have acted in an impure manner. But that doesn't mean that just because we did yesterday, we have to today or tomorrow. So it's a good point. And kind of the whole point, too, of the podcast that we're doing is not just to make everyone feel really bad and guilty and go, man, I'm terrible in this area and I've done this. Does that mean that I'm cast out of heaven? Well, no, it means that you can stop and you can make a decision today and you can move forward and say, yes, I was wrong in the past. I mean, again, it's funny, or it would have been interesting if the wife had come in and said, yep, that's right. We didn't make this, we made this. So, then she would have been given an opportunity, even though maybe she encouraged it or was going along with it to begin with. Still, she had a choice at that point as well. And I think that's kind of the overall point or takeaway as well, is that we always have a choice. What we're going to do today doesn't excuse necessarily what we did yesterday, but certainly it can make us from not repeating the same mistake today or tomorrow.
One of the challenges that we have as men today, again, is the prevalence of immorality, impurity in the world around us. You don't have to look far at all to find it. And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, it's celebrated in the world around us. It's not just there. It's promoted, it's celebrated, whereas years ago, things would be hidden. It would be kind of on the down low. It's like, well, yeah, that's what they do over there in the dark alleys or whatever. But impurity now is just our world around us. Our culture is saturated with it. And again, it's celebrated. It's promoted. And it really is sad because it does make it difficult because it's so normalized. A lot of, especially young Christian men, have grown up in this culture, a culture who's preaching basically do what feels good, do what's right for you. There is no absolute truth. What I believe, what you believe, what others believe, we all have the right to believe what we want and what we believe to be true. And you can see the chaos that's been created by that mindset, yet it is something we have to deal with every day. Back in the 80s and 90s, though, when we were growing up, I don't know if you remember any of this or not, but they had a movement called the purity culture. And it was kind of a leading of young people back to a desire to be pure. And like that one book, True Love Waits, was written then, talking about waiting until you get married. Yeah. To have sex and all those things. Just a general push on sexual purity. Promoted biblical values on sex, and it promoted marriage, and all of those things, just the culture in general. And they had ceremonies and different events and things like that celebrating purity. And again, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. But it's interesting. The author of that book, True Love Waits, came out later, and he pulled the book off the shelf. And so I guess it's no longer sold. He pulled it, and he and his wife actually ended up getting divorced. It's sad.
Yeah.
They were promoting this, pushing this, and then in their own life experienced that breakdown of their marriage, which again is sad. Not judging them. I don't know the details behind it, but a lot of people in culture believe that purity culture was a negative thing, that it was, it didn't make sense to try to persuade young people to wait till they get married to have sex. They felt like the way that it was done was negative as well. It made some young people fearful or ashamed of sex. And so I think there are two sides of it that, is okay. Purity, yes, absolutely. How are we presenting it, right? How are we presenting it to the young people? Are we making, if we look at just the sexuality piece of it, are we making sex look bad, like it's something negative? Don't you do that. God will judge you. And them being brought up in that judgmental sex is bad type, teaching where, then they grow up and even get married. There are some that you'll find that then they had apprehension about sex even then, because like the whole time they've been told it was bad, avoid it, it's not good, it's something dirty, it's, it's something to avoid. And it kind of damaged some people. So I think, again, going back to purity, that we need to make sure we're representing purity in the right way. Purity, for purity's sake, is godly, it's holy, it's what we're called to. But we don't need to call what God has called good, we don't need to call that evil and taint that. Sex in and of itself is God created. It's pure. It's for enjoyment between a married man and a woman, but it's not designed to be used outside of marriage, right? So again, I think we have a responsibility as leaders of our families and in our communities and whatever, to make sure we're presenting purity in the right way, that we're not casting a negative light on the wrong things. Does that make sense? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it's at times, especially during that time, I remember that it's almost a very confusing mixed message that can be delivered, where going, wait a minute, I don't really know what you're saying in your writing. I think it can lead to a lot of confusion. And I think it also goes back, I think it was, excuse me, either last week before, when we were talking about maybe some of the reasons why younger people would look at leaving the church. And one of them was they felt that it was kind of too overreaching, too overpowering, overbearing. I think this, again, could kind of fall into that area, in that if you don't have it done kind of at the local level, so to speak, meaning in your home with parents, or maybe even in small groups, with a youth leader or someone like that, where there's not an opportunity to really actually have maybe a little bit more thorough discussion, not embarrassing, but one where questions can be asked and answered, to where they can feel good about what they are being told. That is completely different than maybe from the pulpit or some kind of mass event, to where you are just having a speaker and he's throwing something out. Maybe you agree with it, maybe you don't, but there's never really any follow-up, and you feel pressure if you're going to be the only one who is not going along with this, that again it becomes very confusing, and in a time to where people go, well, I guess I should do this, but I don't really know why. I don't understand the reasons behind it. And of course, that's not going to be a really solid foundation for purity going forward, that it's going to create more questions than answers. So I think this kind of falls exactly like we were talking about a couple of weeks, to where the church has its place, but it can't overreach. It has to make sure that it's empowering the right people, and especially on our level in our own house, that's where it becomes incumbent upon us as men, as leaders of the family, as fathers, to make sure that we are pouring into our children what we want them to know, that they can get the answers that they deserve and need.
Yeah, one of the biggest mistakes I think we can make, and may have been a big mistake in past generations, was sweeping the subject of sex and purity under the rug. Basically, in a very simple way to saying, be pure. Don't do anything wrong. Don't do these things. With no explanation, with no, let me explain to you why. Let me explain to you the ramifications of going against God's will for these things, and really just ignoring them, letting that be that. Don't do this, don't go there. Here are the rules. Listen to them. And it's like you said, so the younger generation feels like, well, okay, yeah, it's bad, it's evil, I'm not supposed to do it, but it's out there and culture's promoting it. What am I supposed to do here? There's no instruction, there's no leading of them. And then taking that into the home. A lot of parents feel embarrassed about sharing these topics with their kids. They're not easy. It's not easy to sit down with your your tween, or some cases maybe even a little younger now because of how pervasive it is in culture, and having those difficult conversations. But we've talked about this before in our family. We've made an effort to be open and just have those open dialogues, letting our kids know, hey, it's okay to ask questions, being hopefully the first to be able to share some of the details at age appropriate levels with our kids. Here's God's design for sex. Here's the basics of what happens. And here are some things that you need to guard. One of the things I've prayed over our kids for a long time is help them to value their purity. I can pray that God protects their purity, but it's their responsibility to also value it and protect it. That's something within their possession, and that's something that we try to help them understand as guys. Your bodies are precious. They are a gift. They are priceless. Don't just give them to anybody. And this goes for our girls and our son. Don't just give your body to anyone. It needs to be to the one, the one that you choose to spend your life with after you've made that commitment, not before, not I think I'm going to marry this girl, or I want to marry this guy. We're going to go ahead and have sex because we plan. No. That happens after the commitment. That comes along with marriage, not before, right? And again, that's not how it works in culture. And unfortunately, I was reading through some different things preparing for this podcast. Even in the Christian culture, it's not always popular to preach that or to share that. And it's like, man, guys, how can we drift so far away to where we take a very obvious and simple biblical idea or biblical concept and say, I'm not sure. It's just not really, is that really feasible nowadays? Is it so out there? See, yeah, you're right. It is so out there. Why? Why is it so prevalent? Is it because we as Christians haven't lovingly done our job to educate and be a part of the community? Maybe that's part of it. But, like the Bible says, that's for me and my house. I want us to serve the Lord. I want us to have good, strong biblical values, not me dictating what they can and cannot do, but me empowering them, like you said, empowering my kids. Like our families need to be empowered by the church to share and to lead our families the right way. We as parents need to empower our kids. It's like, guys, yes, you should not have sex before marriage. And again, we're focusing on that right now, but you need to be pure in your life in general. Live a life of purity, because the fruits of that lifestyle are going to bear you much good fruit. On the other hand, if you live a lifestyle that's impure sexually and morally in other areas, that's also going to bear fruit, and it's not going to be nearly as good. It's going to cause you a lot of problems throughout your life. So, what are we doing in our homes to promote purity and educate our kids and help them to understand why it's important to be pure?
Yeah, I was just thinking that as parents, we have to get over that awkwardness. It doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be this kind of weird, everyone's looking at their feet, shuffling along, kind of avoiding eye contact. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be a positive conversation. It is what we make it. And certainly we can't rely on schools. We can't rely even on our church to take care of that aspect. That's really not their duty. And I think a lot of people might go, okay, well then, no, I'm not going to rely on school, but then maybe that's to be the church. And I was thinking, probably even less so than, say, stewardship, in tithing. I don't know of a less kind of maybe important topic that's preached on less. I mean, can you think? I mean, I can remember, and I'm thinking back, trying to think like over years, that it's mentioned here and there, maybe as and make sure you remain sexually pure, and that's about it. And it's right on to the next thing. I don't know why. That would actually be interesting, to where maybe they feel like it's not popular, not appropriate. I certainly understand, if you're in a Sunday morning setting, you've got all ages and things like that. And so it might not be the most well-received topic, or you might have to say, kind of give a little bit of a caveat beforehand. If there's any kids, now's the time for them to go off to Sunday school or children's church or whatever you might have at that time. But really, if we're leaving it to the church when it's rarely done, done, or maybe it's done in a confusing manner, or maybe it's just being kind of, don't do this, don't do that. Well, of course, especially with our tweens or whatever age that is, they're finding their boundaries. They're finding who they are, and they are naturally kind of pushing those boundaries and rebelling. So if they're being told don't, of course, as we know, what's your natural reliance or natural kind of responses to go, well, maybe I will, or I'm such a rebel.
Why don't you want me to?
Exactly. Yeah. Why is that? Why is that, Snake, that I can't have a bite of this delicious fruit?
Yeah. Exactly. That's what I was thinking.
It goes all the way back. So it's kind of ingrained in us over many years. So we have to get them to understand the why, and we have to do our part and not just leave it to others.
Yeah. Our pastor actually has talked about sex from the pulpit, sexual topics, and he will obviously give a warning. Hey, today's message is going to be a little PG-13 type thing, and give everybody the opportunity to get the kids to children's church if they haven't already. But you know what? We don't. We let our kids stay in there. Our youngest is 9, almost 10. The oldest is 20. But culture isn't concerned with what my kids hear when it comes to sex. And the things he's sharing on a Sunday morning, man, they can hear that and super worse things just in one song that they come across. Right. It's not like he's saying vulgar things. He's preaching the truth about sex and sexuality. So why would I want to take them out of a Christian environment that's preaching biblical values about sex and how God created it and what the purpose of it, not the purpose like there's only one purpose, but you know what I mean, what God's purpose was, a plan behind it, designed for it. Why would I pull them out of that? I mean, I would rather them, of course, hear it from me and my wife, us teaching them and leading them, but I want them to hear it within our church setting, from a biblical worldview, because they're hearing it anyway. So let them also hear it while we're at church. And again, it's not out of control. It's nothing ridiculous. It's within good parameters. But yeah, man, I want them to hear that, because then again, it's not I don't want them to think it's a dirty off, hands off subject that we can't talk about, off limits. Yeah. Exactly. This is something natural. This is something God created. This is something beautiful. It's in the Bible. Again, Song of Solomon and other places. I mean, yeah, exactly. In fact, when your kids are reading through the Bible, sometimes you hope they'll somehow skip that. You don't want to read that. Exactly. That's a boring one. That's just like Judges or something, whatever, or
Chronicles
or Leviticus.
Yeah,
but it's not taboo. There's nothing wrong with that, and when they can view it as something good that God created, that they could even potentially, know they can look forward to within the marriage parameters, that's good stuff, man. And then it becomes more, I think, of a comfortable, open topic for them to say, hey, Dad, or hey, Mom, when he was saying this morning, I had some questions about this or that, or something my friend said didn't agree with what he's saying. Can we talk about that? And that's exactly what you want, right? You want your kids to feel like they can talk to you about these topics, even if initially it may be a little uncomfortable for you. It may make you squirm a little bit, knowing that they want to come to you with those answers, or for those answers, is great.
Yeah, and if you are caught off guard a little bit by it, by a question, or maybe it's not preceded by a service, just kind of as you're riding home from school one day or something like that, then there's nothing wrong too with going, that's a good question. Let me think about that. Like we've said so often, we don't have to have an immediate ready response that is perfect. That if we don't get awkward or say, don't worry about that or anything like that, that again, we can come back to it and go, okay, now I know I need to talk about this, and soon, and maybe in an hour or very, very soon, tonight, tomorrow morning, something to come back to it. But yeah, if you are caught off guard, it doesn't mean you have to right away come up with a wonderful response, but it does set up an opportunity for you. which is, we have to make sure that we take advantage of those opportunities as parents too when they come along, especially when it's something that's initiated by our child, because so often if they're not, then maybe you're going, okay, how much do they know or not know? So it's, when they're actually asking questions and starting it, that means they've got a curiosity, and we have to make sure that we take advantage of it.
Right. And for us to be able to share a good perspective on being pure, we don't want to be hypocritical. We need to, as men, be living that lifestyle ourselves, and making sure the things we're involved with and thinking on and watching and listening to, that those things are supporting purity, like we were speaking about earlier. So knowing that biblical purity is not popular in today's culture, what are some things that a man can do to promote purity in his own life so that he can then model that? I think number one is we need to have an understanding of purity that does go beyond because I said so. That we have a commitment to purity. We talk about in other areas, working out and different things in our life, we talk about how having a long-term goal or a bigger goal is important in being successful. In the working out or exercising scenario, we talk about, somebody that says, I want to look good when I go to the beach this summer. That's a pretty short-term goal. Mm-hmm. And they may actually lose that 20 pounds and get, maybe put on some muscle in the 4 or 5 months that are leading up to that summer or that beach vacation. But what's going to sustain that after the beach is done? When they're back home, when it's easier to, like you said, watch that movie, eating a pint of Haagen-Dazs, mm-hmm. when Thanksgiving dinner is served and they, all of these delicious things are on the table, what's preventing them then from overindulging and beginning to get back into that lifestyle? It has to be a bigger goal. They have to want to be healthy long-term for a bigger reason than just looking good at the beach. That might be part of it, but for something much more valuable, I think that's what it boils down to, is what's the value of the reason we're making our decision. So thinking about purity is what do we consider most valuable? When we say, I want to be pure, okay, why do you want to be pure? Just because, a preacher said, do it? Or is there something bigger? And when we can find that bigger reason for our purity, it's going to help us to be able to maintain that. It's going to give us a greater desire, a long-term desire to remain pure. So as we get into God's Word and discover His purpose and plan for us and His desire for us to be pure and why He desires for us to be pure, not so we can't have fun, but so we can have that communion with Him and that relationship with Him. Whenever we start to discover these things, and even outside of just strictly a biblical mindset or even within a relationship with God, within a relationship with others. We want to be pure because we want our kids to see that in us. We want our spouse to be able to trust us and know that we're pure. And even within our community, as we expand out into other things in our careers, our workplaces, we want to be pure in the way that we do business and have good intentions toward our customers and our employer. When we live that way and people know we live that way, then it just promotes a much healthier lifestyle that we will be able to maintain for years, because we have a bigger goal than just, I want to be pure because that's what my preacher told me I had to do when I was 12.
Right. So we have to know our why. We have to actually say, yes. Why am I doing this? Any analogy that you use is right. Just like, well, why do I want to exercise, try to put on muscle in my 40s? Well, not just because Peter Attia told me it was a good idea. I better actually know why he's saying that. Why do I want to do that? What is going to be my motivation beyond just a couple of months? What is going to sustain it? Same thing. Why do I want to be pure? Because then I'm going to be able to be, as we've talked about before, to be more authentic, and I'm going going to be able to pass it on to my kids as well, to where they will know why
Yeah.
I'm doing it. So again, as you're saying, why can you not have a cookie after every single meal? Well, it's not just because I said no, that's not a good idea, and because I want a cookie too and I can't do it, you can't do it. No, not because of that. Here's why that is not a good idea. And hopefully, as we explain and let them in on our why, that they will understand it deeper, that maybe and hopefully that will translate them then to them as well, to become part of their why. That, as we've said before, modeling by far and away is one of the most and best ways to parent, to let them see, because whether we want them to or not, they are watching us, they are seeing what we are doing. So if we are modeling that for them, then they will naturally know that path. They will be able to fall back on it, just like we talked earlier about being able to fall back on the word of the Lord when it comes in that certain situations. It's the same thing for our kids. Well, I know I'm not going to do that too, because I've seen that done all my life. That's a great example that has been set for me. And it wasn't just because he said don't do this, don't do that. He told me why, and I understood it, and it made sense to me. And so now that's eventually they're going to have to come up with their own why as well. But it's again, though, going back to the original part, it's important for us to know why, and not just, oh well, Bible says so. Okay, well, actually do a deep dive, look at it. Why is God saying this? Why is it going to benefit you? Why is it throughout the Old and New Testament to remain pure? And come to your own conclusions. And I think then it will actually make sense, and it will be so much easier to follow and to carry through every aspect of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, the pursuit of purity is not about the suppression of lust, but about the reorientation of one's life to a larger goal. Yeah, this thing that goes right along with it. What is his why? It's not about just suppressing my feelings. Going back to this guy's question, what is a way to control your lust? It's not just about suppressing it, holding it down, wrestling with it, because that's a never-ending fight. And to some degree, we are going to always have to be aware. There's always going to be times and things that we'll have to deal with. But it goes back to the larger mission. Okay, am I just trying to suppress something that I'm feeling? Or am I reorienting? Am I realigning my life with something larger, with purpose? Because when I do that, when I have a larger purpose for my life, the idea of not acting on lustful thoughts or acting impure in business and all those things, that just goes along with the flow. It's like a river. It's just part of what I'm doing. Of course, I'm not going to do those things because my life is oriented toward God and the plan that He has for me and the mission that I'm here for. It's just, I'm not going to introduce those things because they don't align. So I thought that was really good. And what you shared is just spot on. Another idea that's very important is we need a good foundation for purity. We need our foundation to be strong. Again, not just because I said so, but there needs to be an understanding of why we need to be pure. Because again, going back to culture, today's culture doesn't support the idea of purity. It's do what feels good, do what feels right to you. So if we expect our kids to, then we need to, create a strong foundation of why, and through God's word and through wisdom. But even within our own lives, if we don't feel like we have a good why, a good foundation, then we need to spend some time establishing that so that we have something to say, okay, this is why I'm committed to purity in all areas of my life.
Yeah, it's Peter said in 1 Peter 22 that we need to be obedient to the truth. So if we believe that God, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, if we believe that the Bible is the truth, then we need to be obedient to that and to what He has called us to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And then another important part of it is the relationships around us. Last week, we talked about accountability and opening ourselves up to other people. And that's a big part of our purity, I believe, because it is, and to some degree, it will be a battle that we fight in different ways throughout life, purity in general. So when we have guys around us that we can have these discussions with and say, hey, you ever dealt with this? Has this ever come up? Again, whatever it is, it may not even be a sexual thing. How did you deal with this when this customer wanted you to do this or, whatever? having those relationships and that accountability can help us to make better decisions and to remain better committed. And of course, our relationship with God is of utmost importance. That should be the most important relationship we have, maintaining that, because through our relationship with Him, He supernaturally is able to help us. He helps us to see that way of escape with every temptation. Sometimes it might be tough for us because the temptation itself, the opportunity itself is so glaring and, in our face. Seeing around it or side to side, it may be very difficult. But the Holy Spirit's able to illuminate that way out. No, you don't have to give in. Here's the way. Look to your right, whatever, and make that escape. But we've got to have that relationship with God, and we have to value that relationship, because again, it is a choice. Sometimes we may see, like on the old cartoons where you see the flashing arrow, it's like go this way, go this way, go this way. We see that in the midst of temptation. We see this big red flashing arrow. Here's the way out. Here's the way out. But we're refusing to go that way. Yeah, I see it. I see it. But I'm really enjoying this. I really want to make this decision. I really want to experience this. And so we have to value that relationship with God and that bigger long-term goal more than the temporary enjoyment, pleasure, benefits that we may get from living an impure way.
Yeah, and the relationships is a good part, because that's when we were talking before, and you had mentioned, the question, that was the first thing that I asked you, is this guy single or married? And I think it makes a difference. I think it does make it more difficult when someone is single. I think when you are married, that you naturally should be sharing with your wife when you are struggling with different impurities, that it might be something that's difficult. But I remember having or hearing a psychologist that was talking about this and saying that when you are having these secrets, when you are not sharing, that it makes it even more difficult, and that's when things or problems start to mushroom, start to build, start to become even more of an issue. So when you have different ones that you can share, and just like you said, if it's with your wife, of course you should, but even if you're single or married, having guys around you that you can go, hey, I'm really struggling with this. What do you think? And knowing that you've got people that are not going to judge you, but they're going to give you honest advice and maybe say, yeah, I have, or what, I've actually got a resource for you, and someone that can help you through it to where you feel like you're not in it alone. And again, it's not necessarily just a sexual temptation. It could be with business. I've been given this opportunity, or I am seeing how other coworkers are doing this. I don't feel like that's right. What do you think? Am I just looking at this from a different angle? Am I correct? Or how do I find my way out of it to where I'm not just out of a job, or maybe I need to change? But it really makes a difference to be able to have someone there that we can talk through these struggles, to not feel like it's ours alone to bear, and that we've got others around us that can help guide us or encourage us.
Yes, right. Yeah, we need that. We've talked about how we cannot live life as an island. It's all but impossible. We need guys around us and to learn from, and to be held accountable to, and just to do life with. It's a lot more enjoyable to go through life with other people than it is solo. And it really would help us be a lot more successful in these areas. The last one that I noted was we need to be healthy. And we talk about health quite a bit in different podcasts, but in this area, I think healthy means a little something different. We need to have a healthy view of sin. What is sin? We need to have an accurate view of it. It's not, sin is not just, oops, it's, I screwed up. It's fine. Lord understands. We need to have a healthy view of it. Sin separates us from God. We need to recognize how serious sin is, and what is sin. Is it a sin for me to cheat on my taxes? Is it a sin for a man to lust? Is it a sin for a man to steal from his company? And I think a lot of us will say, yes. But again, it gets blended when you look at culture. It gets kind of diffused and say, well, I don't know. It's kind of gray area. It's easy to throw things into a gray area because we make excuses and we say, well, because of this, or other people are doing it, or like you were saying, everybody in the company is doing it like this, and they're prospering more than I because they're fudging the numbers or whatever. Okay, but is it right? Is it sin? And when we have that long-term goal is, okay, my goal long-term is not to get rich. It's not to climb the corporate ladder quicker than everyone else. My long-term goal is to please God with my life and to spend eternity with Him. If that's my goal, then all of the decisions I make are going to be made through that lens. And my view of sin is going to be very serious because I know that sin separates me from God. It damages that relationship. Again, it's not irreversible. It's not like I'm done if I mess up or if I sin. But it's something I need to get taken care of. I need to take it seriously because God does. He took it so seriously that He sent His Son to die for me because of it. So we need to have a healthy view of sin. And along with that, we need to have a healthy awareness of our weaknesses. We've talked about this throughout the podcast, but we need to be aware where we are weak. It could be different things for different men. Not everybody struggles sexually. Not everybody struggles, just like everybody would not get addicted to alcohol if they drank it. But different things will affect different men. So be aware of your weaknesses. Because when you're aware, you can do something about it.
Yeah, I would say everyone will struggle in different areas. That's, two guys that we refer to a lot, enjoy their podcast, Huberman and Peter Attia. They actually had a podcast together this week, and it was interesting because at the end they were talking about some of the different areas to where they struggle. And, two guys that have fairly similar takes on a lot of topics, and yet they were talking, they struggle in different areas. Peter was saying that he really struggles more so with food, that if left to his own devices, he would eat Fruit Loops all day long because he loves them. And Huberman was going, yeah, not me. Like, I actually really enjoy healthy food. That's never really been a problem for me. And so it's funny that, two guys, that you go, oh yeah, and it's the same as, if you and I were to start talking about, well, here I struggle with this, but not that. And I've had conversations with other family members too, and it's the same thing going, yeah, there's some people that we're not tempted at all by alcohol, take it or leave it. Some people, that is a really big struggle. Same thing with, as you said, with lust or with working, with not communicating. I mean, we all have different ones. So we need to be aware of our strengths, our weaknesses. We need to seek out people who can help us where we are weak, they are strong, and vice versa. If we know someone tells us they are weak and we are strong in it, then we need to do the same thing. Again, when we were talking about being accountable and being a mentor, a few weeks ago, it's very similar that we need to be aware of it. We need to take more of an honest assessment for ourselves so that we will know where we are weak, where we may fail, and then, as you said at the very beginning, when might we fail? When we are tempted in a certain way, when we are tired, whenever it is, we need to be aware of it. So you're absolutely right. We need to make sure that we take an honest assessment of ourselves and that we are aware, and as you said, that we are aware of what sin means, that the wages of sin is death. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. So if that's what we believe, and we have to guard our life in all those areas and make sure that we just don't go, this is the only area that I struggle in. I remember Tim Tebow talking one time back during his playing days, and they were asking about his diet and how he did during the week. And, well, did he have a cheat day, a meal or a day a week where he would, eat pizza, eat whatever he wanted? And he kind of bristled and was like, no, why would I? He's like, if I believe in something and I'm going toward this goal, why would I do that? A lot of us wish we could act that way towards our meals, but still, his point that we can take too is the same in terms of sin, going, well, no, if we want to go to heaven, if we want to be pure, why would we give ourselves a pass on this one area or in this one particular space? Doesn't make any sense. And we need to, recognize it and try to correct it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of men would like to have a cheat day in whatever area they do struggle in. It's like, well, I just need a cheat day, man. Right. And I think that reveals our heart, right? If a person on a diet wants a cheat day to eat whatever they want, that means there's no heart change there. They are doing the diet probably for a smaller purpose than the greater overall purpose. Because again, when your purpose is large, when you have something that you're striving for that's bigger than you or a long-term goal, then it's not about what can I get away with. It's about how can I get to that goal, as quickly or as in the best way possible. And if that means in this case, eating a certain way and lifting and working out and exercising on a certain program. I want that to be my lifestyle. I don't want to see how can I skirt it? Can I work out a lot this week and then kind of sporadically next week, and follow a diet closely this week, and have cheat day every weekend or whatever. Again, it reveals who we are. It reveals where our true allegiance lies. But when we as men say, no, this is the bigger goal. I want to accomplish this. It's not about me. It's about, my relationship with God. It's about my family. It's about those I'm surrounded by. Then it gives a bigger purpose to us. And we don't want to cheat. And when we do make a mistake, we truly are sorrowful. Like, man, I can't believe that. I wish I wouldn't have done it. I'm sorry, Lord, forgive me, and keep plugging forward. Keep your main goals in mind and keep moving toward those. Another perspective we need to have is we need to be aware of the opportunities around us to be immoral. What are we surrounded by? Again, we've talked about some of this throughout the podcast, but we need to have a healthy awareness of our environment. And there are some cases you referenced maybe needing even to change a job if it's a bad environment perpetually where it's just bad stuff's happening. You don't want to be a part of something that overall is unhealthy. And that could be, again, in a job, it could be in a group of friends, could even be in it's weird to say, but even within a church, if it's not healthy, if it's not serving the right purposes, then we may need to remove ourselves from certain environments so that we can live a life that is focused and pure. And the last one that I noted here was we have to have a healthy desire to fight. It doesn't depend on us, but we need to be involved. We need to be willing to fight, because as I referenced earlier, even if there's a way of escape that the Lord has made obvious, if we're not willing to fight, if we're not willing to move that direction, then we're going to fail over and over. We do play a role in this. We can't blame the Lord and say, well, Lord, you told me that you would help me, that you would create a way of escape. It's like, you've referenced the story many times, someone drowning in the ocean, and, a lifeboat comes by and says, no, the Lord's going to save me. And an ocean liner comes by. No, the Lord's going to save me. A helicopter comes by. No, the Lord's going to save me. And he drowns. Like, well, Lord, why didn't you save me? He's like, yeah, I actually tried 3 times. Exactly. You refused. Yep. It's, but it has so much application. We want to be saved in the way we think we should be saved. Just take the desire away, Lord, or take the opportunity away. Those types of prayers that we pray. Well, Lord, Paul prayed. He said, I prayed 3 times that the Lord would take away this thorn in the flesh, but he didn't. He said, my grace is sufficient. And that's tough for us to hear sometimes. Like, Lord, I know, I agree, your grace is sufficient, but I don't just want the grace. I want this removed. I don't want to deal with this anymore. Oh, yeah. But those things that we're dealing with, number one, they can make us stronger. Whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger type thing. We can get stronger spiritually too as we endure these temptations, succeed each time. But what it also does is it creates testimonies within our own life where we're going to say, hey, listen, I get it. I have been there. In fact, I encounter this often. However, you do not have to fail. You don't have to give in. You don't have to continue this path, whatever it is in that circumstance. The Lord is faithful, man. Let me tell you how he's blessed me and how he's helped me in the face of this stuff. So looking for opportunities to encourage others who may be going through similar things.
This is summed up perfectly for me by something that you said a couple of weeks ago. And it's funny, when you hear something that you've heard multiple times, maybe you've said yourself, and maybe you forgot about it, not heard it for a while, and then it's repeated, it's almost like the light bulb goes on above your head. And it's, truthfully, of course, no, everything you say is quite wise, and I always, record it later to go back and review the minutes at the end of the day. But this in particular was spot on. This is the difference between having good intentions and being intentional. That we can have good intentions all we want, and that will lead us into a life of destruction. We can have intended intended to be faithful to our wife. We could have intended to be honest in our business dealings, and have intended to teach our children in the way that they should go, and all those different things. But unless we are actually intentional about it, we make a plan, we stick to it, and then we act on it, then all those intentions are just that. They're just intentions, and they're not really going to do us any good. So we have to make sure that we are intentional, that we are, as you said here, that we are ready to fight, meaning that we are ready to take action. We are ready to move forward, that we are ready to let God help us. We are ready to reach out for the life raft and start swimming toward the boat rather than just treading water and thinking eventually he's going to deliver us. I think there is a big difference, and it is, again, just perfectly summed up by that.
Well, I'm glad something I said had such a profound impact on your life.
It took until
Even
August.
If you said it first, and I just reminded you. Yeah.
That's right.
So really just summing it all up, being pure goes beyond just a sexual context. We as men need to be pure in all areas of our life. It takes a foundation of understanding your why. As you pointed out, we need to have a why. We need to know what our why is, and it needs to be bigger than just a short-term goal. And then we need to have people around us that hold us accountable and can keep us going in the right direction, right? And then also, of course, knowing that we're accountable to God, and always keeping that in mind. It's not seeing him as someone who's just waiting for us to mess up, but knowing that relationship we have with him, it's his desire that we grow and that we're successful and that we remain pure, so that our relationship is strong with him. It's similar to, you and I, if we were dishonest with each other, or treated each other unfairly, or whatever, deceitfully, that would really strain a relationship. It would be really hard to have a relationship with somebody who is not honest with you, or who you never talked to, or who you didn't understand. It's similar with God. We have that relationship. It's different in that he is obviously God, but we have that relationship with him. He desires it. As a father with a child, we have that relationship. He does understand us. He understands our humanity, and he doesn't excuse it, but he makes a way, like we've been talking about. So the takeaway, I believe, from this podcast is being intentional with our purity, having a sincere desire to live a pure life, and doing what it takes to live that life, including other people, letting them help you along the way, and making sure that every day we're making decisions that support the purity that the Lord calls for in our life.
I think that's all very true, that we have to make sure that we are laying a foundation that we know is solid, that we're not building our house on sand, that we know exactly why we are doing certain things, that we are then taking action for it, that we are being intentional in how we treat others and how we deliver certain messages to our children and to others, that we act that way each day, and that when we do stumble, that we recognize it, that we ask for forgiveness, and that we move on, that we're not kind of constantly beholden and making ourselves feel even worse by our past stumbles. And at the same time too, that we're not just trying to suppress something, as you said earlier, because obviously that's not mentally healthy. If it is whatever area that we're struggling in, just trying to ignore it or to suppress it, to try to push it down without actually seeking a remedy for it, without actually seeking to redirect that energy, to understand it, to overcome it, is just eventually going to set us up for failure. So we have to make sure that we deal with it head on, that we make sure that we know where our life rafts are, and that we swim towards them as well.
So for this gentleman who wrote this question, what is a way of controlling your lust? What is a way to control his lust? We hope this podcast has answered that question. And for any of you guys out there who may have the same question, how do I control this? How do I deal with this on a daily basis? We hope that something we've said here can help answer that you have a better understanding of the part you play, and the part that God plays, and the part that those around you play, and how all of that can work together to help us be better at controlling our passions, our desires, and overall living a life that is pure before the Lord. We just want to thank you guys for taking the opportunity to listen to this podcast. If you have any questions, like this guy, please feel free to email us. Let us know what your questions are. Maybe we can include them in a future podcast. You can reach us at the Intentional Man Podcast at mententional.org. And we'd love to hear from you. And we hope you have a great week. And we look forward to catching up with you next time. God bless you. Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Intentional Man Podcast. If you haven't already, please follow us, give us a 5-star rating, and share the podcast with a man you think may enjoy it. If you'd like to contact us, you can email us at theintentionalmanpodcast@mententional.org. For more information about our show topics, visit us online at www.mententional.org. We hope you have a great week, and remember, guys, choose to be intentional. Thank you.